Let me give you another example of the way economic statistics mislead. Also today, they announced that industrial production was up 1%. And this led to a rise in the stock market. But if you look at why is industrial production up 1%, it's largely due, I believe, to the fact that all the disruptions in automobile production over the last year or two, about GM's bankruptcy, about the insolvency, I think, of Chrysler, everything was disrupted to the extent that just getting back to stability produces statistically a rise in industrial production. Another way they get rises in industrial production is they use as a way of measuring it power usage. So if power usage is high, they assume industrial output is rising. But of course, when you have these massive heat waves, what happens to power?
Sure, it's August, and that's always the biggest power consumption, so they won't look at the months before or the months after. They put it out there falsely as a trend. Well, here's an example.
It's a monthly, that's right, it's a monthly report that they put out. Right.
Well, I mean, you know how they manipulate, the cost-earnings ratio. You know a lot more than I do as an economist how all this works. But, I mean, just to simply look at it, Dr. Roberts, what was it, 15 years ago they changed the rules where a hamburger place gets a manufacturing credit for putting cheese on a piece of meat and putting bread on it. And so here at my office, simply making films and packaging them and shipping them, I get the manufacturing credit. I mean, I take that credit, but I'm not really manufacturing under the classical sense, so they're changing definitions.
That's right. That's exactly right, Alex. There's probably many more of these things than you or I are aware of. But I just wanted to give you and your listeners the two examples from today's economic reports to show how misleading they can be. And so I think it's going to be a little bit longer, I can't say how much longer, before people, or very many people, catch on. Of course, some people know already and have known for some time. But even if, you suggested that perhaps the elite themselves realize that it's all over with, but I'm not so sure, because today's stock market rose substantially on the basis of good news, which is consists of statistical artifacts that aren't real. So I'm not sure that people have caught on, or that the elite have caught on. Generally, the elite are so full of hubris and self-confidence and arrogance and revel so much in their power that they don't catch on. They get swept away and they're surprised. So what happened?
No, historically, you're right. Dr. Roberts, stay there. We're going to break. I want to come back and go more into your excellent piece, The Ecstasy of Empire, and that hubris you're talking about, and how you talk about we're almost past the point of no return. What is that point of no return? We'll be right back. But the mere fact that so many radio stations are now turning this show on, instead of getting 1 or 2 new affiliates a month over the years, and then stations are bought and sold and you lose some, we're now getting 2, 3, 4 a week. And these are big stations in the biggest cities. The fact that the Drudge Report would pick up your story from Infowars.com, the fact that, a lot of people I talk to that are middle class, nouveau riche, working class, they are getting it. Now, I agree with you. The hubris-filled super elites, the ruling class, a lot of them are very delusional. But you spoke about the revolution in 1917, 1918, and of course you're right. As a researcher, that the people rebelled, then the communists came in from Germany, England, and New York and took it over. And I see that as the great danger. Ron Paul has said that during this crisis, we've got to be more active than ever so that people with horrible ideas don't use the crisis to get more control. Dr. Roberts?
That's right. There's no way to predict the outcome of that. Being vigilant but that requires organization, which doesn't exist either. So I don't know what we can do other than rejoice that it will sweep away the current the current bad crop. It may give us a worse crop. On the other hand, the people may provide the kind of leadership at the time that's needed. But Alex, rather than speculate on these things, let's talk about, because you wanted to know at what point do we hit the point of no return?
Yes.
And can't get out of the crisis. And as I've emphasized many times with you on your show, the big crisis is, when do we lose the dollar as reserve currency, and when can the federal government no longer finance its huge budget deficit except by printing money? Now, and I've made the point over and over, you can finance a $400 or $500 billion deficit, but you can't finance one that's $1 trillion for $500 billion. And we've now into the second year of $1.5 trillion deficits. How are they being financed? I think they're being financed in the following ways. The flight of individual investors from stocks into what they regard as safe government bonds. That's one way it's being financed. Now, that can't go on forever. Once people have fled the stock market, I don't mean the big money managing firms and the pension firms, but the individuals. They are leaving, they've left. The other way the budget deficit is being financed is through the Federal Reserve's purchase of all of the bad paper, the subprime derivatives, and so forth, that the banks got themselves stuck with. The Fed simply bought that from them, gave them bank reserves, and the banks used those bank reserves to buy the government's bonds. So that's the second way it's being financed. Again, this can't go on forever either. Once the
well, the Fed's now announced they're going to start monetizing, correct?
Yes, but what they're talking about is what they're already doing. They're going to buy financial instruments from the banks, hoping that the banks then use the excess reserves to lend. But of course they won't, because there are no creditworthy borrowers. And so that doesn't lead to money creation. The banks have to respond to that, you see, by creating new demand deposits, making loans. But they haven't been doing that. Instead, they use the excess reserves to buy more treasury bonds. So now the third way the government has used is the Greek crisis.
Stay there, Doctor. We've got to break back in 70 seconds. We'll cover the third way. When do we pass the point of no return? That answer is straight ahead. Stay with us. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts is our guest. He, of course, is the author of the latest story the Drudge Report picked up from Infowars.com, The Ecstasy of Empire. And at the end of the article, you can link through at Amazon.com and get the powerful book, How the Economy Was Lost, The War of the Worlds. It details how this country is, why this country is disintegrating. Okay, Dr. Roberts, you were getting into the third way they plan to finance all of this at the point of no return. Go ahead.
All right, it's the Greek crisis. You know, the Greeks got heavily in debt, and so the New York investment banks and the hedge funds made a run on them, caused a Greek crisis, and then the New York investment banks and hedge funds multiplied the Greek crisis into the euro crisis. And the financial press, of course, became an adjunct to the Treasury's financing needs, and they spread all over that, the euro is going, the euro won't last. And the euro collapsed dramatically against the dollar. Well, this caused all kinds of individuals and foreign central banks who had been holding euros as reserves, as an alternative to the dollar, to flee the euro and flee into the dollar. That means buying treasury bonds. So the United States government was able to use its private financial apparatus to finance its deficit by drawing funds out of Europe.
But you said at the time it wouldn't last, and it didn't.
No, it doesn't. But you see, they may next start on Spain and Ireland and Portugal. So they can keep it going, and as long as they have some country in the EU that's sufficiently indebted that the financial press can create the image of a disaster, and that the hedge funds and the investment banks can make money by shorting or driving down. So as long as they can produce these flights of fear from other countries' holdings and from other currencies into the dollar, they can keep this going. But of course, it is limited. It can't go on forever. And so what I think the way they're playing this game is that the decline of the United States will be sudden, because the minute there's no longer any way to finance the deficit, it means they have to print the money. The minute they do that, the dollar is no longer the reserve currency.
What about China? I see them hyping that China is going to have a depression, and I see them talking about trying to manipulate China, but China's our biggest holder, and I've seen China getting angry, devaluing the U.S. treasuries and EU treasuries in the last month.
Well, that's correct, and today there's an article on Global Research about we keep trying to provoke them militarily, and we're making them very angry. If you think about the behavior of the United States government, it is irrational. It does look to be desperate. I don't think they would succeed in driving assets out of China into the United States. I don't think that's possible. But who knows? Nevertheless, when they no longer can produce a flow into dollars or into U.S. Treasury bonds out of some fear or some hyped crisis, that's when the financing problem hits, and that's when the dollar ceases to be the reserve currency. And the minute that happens, we can't pay our import bill. And so the supply of goods and services into the United States from abroad are greatly curtailed. And this, of course, includes petroleum.
Dr. Roberts, we've got one more segment with you. You've been very gracious to give us your expertise and, of course, your great articles that we're posting at Infowars.com. We're going to come back and talk about this desperate game they're playing, and they are trying to start a war with China, and they're not Iraq. They're not Iran. We'll talk about that straight ahead with Dr. Paul Craig Roberts. Stay with us.